Legendary Armament Canon, Chapter 1, Wuxia World Chapter 1, Legendary Armament Canon Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios Joshu was in a daze as he took in his surroundings. Transmigrated? This was a ludicrous notion, which even he couldn't believe. Even so, facts spoke louder than words. He couldn't think of anyone who would play such a prank on him, and the only explanation he could come up with was transmigration. He distinctly remembered sleeping in his opulent 20-square-meter bedroom the night before, yet he awoke in such a rundown farmyard. If this was a joke played on him, the expense would be too high. Anyway, it was impossible to find such a rundown farmyard in the city these days. My room is larger than this entire farmyard? While Joshu was lamenting, a slew of disorganized memories slammed into his mind out of nowhere. This unexpected occurrence caused Joshu to groan, squat down, and hug his head with both hands. After a long time, the swelling pain in his head subsided, and his eyes regained clarity. Great Xia, Forging Division. Joshu ruminated on the memories that surfaced in his mind, gaining a general understanding of his predicament. The predecessor of this body was someone who also went by the name Joshu. He had turned 18 this year, and 3 generations of his ancestors had been craftsmen from Great Xia's Forging Division, which was in charge of forging weapons. His grandfather and father had died as a result of exhaustion in their earlier years. Thus, when he turned 18, he immediately inherited his father's profession and became an apprentice in the Forging Division. In the end, he, like his ancestors, died of exhaustion, benefiting this transmigrator, Joshu. Forger, don't they just forge metal? Joshu assessed his current living situation while rummaging through the memories. The small yard he was currently in was the residence provided to the craftsmen by the Ministry of the Forging Division. Although 3 generations of his predecessors' ancestors worked directly for the Ministry of State, they were unable to obtain even a house in the imperial capital of Great Xia. Joshu's predecessor's savings had further been used up when he attempted to treat his parents' illnesses before they died. In other words, this small farmyard was his current self's only safe refuge. At the very least, I have a place to put my feet and won't end up on the streets. Joshu consoled himself. It was difficult to stay in the empire's capital. Having a place to stay was already thought of to be a plus. This farmyard was only 20 square meters. Aside from a rundown bedroom, there was a shed in the corner that appeared to house a smithy. The smithy was the only way his predecessor could make a living. The Forging Division was brutal, and the craftsmen slept and worked in the same place. As expected, as the lowest of the low, you are a sucker waiting to be played, regardless of where you are. Joshu sighed. The Forging Division treated their forgers well, relatively speaking. Even the lowest level underlings, such as Joshu, were provided with food and lodging, as well as half a tael of silver monthly. But the workload was too intense. Using Joshu's current situation as an example, the Forging Division required forging apprentices to hand over 100 weapons every month. This meant that he had to forge at least 3 weapons per day on average to complete the task. Otherwise, whipping and punishment were in store for him. His predecessor was well educated and had begun learning how to forge at a young age. Despite this, he still needed 4 to 6 hours to forge a weapon. Forging 3 weapons took an average of 14 to 16 hours, and that was assuming everything went smoothly. In reality, achieving a success rate of 100% in forging was impossible. When the forging failed, he had to restart. As a result, he worked nearly 16 hours per day. Therefore, aside from eating and sleeping, he had to work non-stop every day to finish the task on time. With this level of workload, it was no wonder that his predecessor had become exhausted to the point of death. Am I going to die from exhaustion after having just transmigrated? Joshu felt like crying but didn't have any tears. He believed that if he continued to work in this manner, he would die within a month. It appears the only way to survive is to figure out how to become an official forging master. Joshu pondered. He had signed a contract with the Forging Division, so he couldn't leave. But the Forging Division had its method of advancement. He was a forging apprentice. He was at the lowest level, similar to a dog's body. Official Forging Master was the rank above Forging Apprentice. Forging Masters were already members of the Forging Division's technical staff, and they were not treated in the same way that Forging Apprentices were. They could live in proper houses with a kitchen and a toilet. Their pay was also significantly higher than that of Forging Apprentices. Most importantly, their workload was less demanding than that of forging apprentices. As forging masters, they completed the task if they handed in 30 weapons every month. High-level forging masters were above forging masters. They were the forging division's main strength. Every high-level forging master was regarded as the forging division's wealth, and they were treated far better than forging masters. Grand craftsmen were the level above high-level forging masters. If high-level forging masters were the forging division's wealth, then grand craftsmen were the forging division's treasures. It wasn't a stretch of the imagination to regard each grand craftsman as a national treasure. Grand craftsmen were almost on par with the forging division's directors in terms of social standing. Directors from the forging division were fifth-ranked officials. They were the equivalent of deputy bureau chiefs, which were the same rank as deputy mayors in Joshu's previous life. But even directors from the forging division had to be respectful of grand craftsmen on a practical level. After all, there were a lot of fifth-ranking officials but only a handful of grand craftsmen. There appeared to be even more powerful forging masters above grand craftsmen. This, however, was not information that Joshu's predecessor could obtain. One's future would be bright if one could become a forging master. But becoming a forging master was no easy task. 3 generations of Joshu's predecessors' ancestors had all been forging apprentices in the forging division, but they hadn't been able to become forging masters even until Joshu's predecessor. This demonstrated how difficult it was. The requirement for becoming a forging master was quite simple: the ability to forge ranked weapons. The weapons in this world were classified as heaven, earth, black, and yellow. Weapons forged by apprentices such as Joshu were standard and unranked weapons. Forging masters and above held all of the secret formulas for forging ranked weapons and always kept them secret. It was nearly impossible for Joshu to become a forging master without the assistance of a master. In reality, the forging division had tens of thousands of forging apprentices, and hardly 1 in 100 could advance to become a forging master. Surely that doesn't mean I'll be stuck to death here? Joshu picked up a standard long saber that his predecessor had forged and began to examine it. He knew nothing about forging and had no idea what the distinction between a standard and a ranked weapon was. What should I do? He pondered for a long time, trying to recall a solution from his predecessor's memories. Suddenly, his vision blurred, and he noticed a dazzling golden light. Amid his dizziness, a blue-covered book appeared in front of him. A few primitive words were written on the book's cover. Joshu understood what they meant. At first glance, rustle, even without any wind, the blue book flipped through several pages before coming to a halt. Joshu's gaze was drawn to the book, where he saw the drawing of a long saber. It appeared to be the same as the standard long saber he was holding in his hand. The drawing was exquisite, as if the saber was actually in front of him. A line of ancient words was written on the saber. Sharp standard long saber. A piece of information appeared in Joshu's mind just as he saw these words. The standard long saber's forging method? Joshu's eyes glowed. He had a solution to his problem? Chapter 2, Sharp Standard Long Saber Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. In Joshu's head, a piece of information appeared. It was the method to forge a standard long saber. In truth, it was the formula for forging a sharp standard long saber, the method for quenching and forging. All of the steps were meticulously outlined. Even the angles of the hammer strikes were noted down. Joshu felt as if he had gained a lot of experience all of a sudden. He even wanted to pick up a hammer to forge a sharp standard long saber right then and now. As the name implies, a sharp standard long saber should be sharper than typical standard long sabers. As Joshu blinked, the legendary Armament Canon vanished before his eyes. With just a thought, it reappeared in front of him. He tried flipping through the legendary Armament Canon, but all he could see was the page with the sharp standard long saber. He couldn't see or navigate to the other content. It appeared to be because he didn't meet the requirements. Employing the strategy of looking before leaping, Joshu began to study the sharp standard long saber. The standard long saber was the standard weapon of the 3 military forces of Great Xia. It was the most basic weapon and had a fair amount of sharpness and sturdiness. After all, it was merely the standard issue weapon given to regular soldiers. I wonder how much sharper sharp standard long sabers are than standard long sabers. Will it be possible to attain the level of a yellow-grade weapon? Joshu's brows furrowed in thought. His predecessor had been a simple, honest young man absorbed in his work and had never come into contact with any ranked weapons. So Joshu was also clueless. First, I'll forge a sharp standard long saber and examine it. Joshu decided that rather than overthinking things, he should roll up his sleeves and get to work. The sharp standard long saber's forging process had already been etched on his mind, nearly becoming an instinct for him to follow. Without thinking, Joshu threw an iron ingot into the furnace. This iron ingot was a material given by the forging division. They were delivered regularly to the forging apprentices' residences, and the supply was unlimited. Forging masters were thought of to be very generous in this regard. In any case, forging apprentices were unable to transport the forged weapons outside of their division. Sharp standard long sabers were constructed using the same materials as standard long sabers. Sharp standard long sabers differed in that their forging process was extremely exact. The fire control, timing, strength, and angles all required strict regulation. If these things hadn't been imprinted in Joshu's mind, he might not have been able to learn them even if someone had taught him personally. Ding dang dang! A sensation of flesh and blood connecting burst through Joshu's heart as he clutched the hammer. While he swung the hammer deftly, it seemed to become an extension of his body. Even though it was already late at night, the sounds of hammering and pounding resounded all around him. As a result, Joshu didn't have to worry about disturbing anyone's sleep. Joshu appeared to be in a bizarre state as the hammer danced in his hand. He could sense the changes in the iron ingot with each blow. It was as though he could see the impurities in the iron ingot being continuously hammered out. The iron ingot appeared to undergo an exceptional transformation, and every molecule in it seemed to be emitting light. Joshu maintained his composure. He continued to hammer in the same pattern as before. The hammer created elegant curves in the air before landing at various angles on the iron ingot. After some time, he stabbed the long saber into a tank of ice-cold well water, and white steam burst out. Joshu was exhausted to the point of wanting to die. His arm ached and felt like it was about to fall off, and every cell in his body was groaning. His expression, on the other hand, was ecstatic as he eagerly drew the long saber he had just forged from the water. Clear water drops poured down the long saber, and, in a blink of an eye, the saber was no longer stained with water. It was bright and immaculate, and it seemed to come alive as light circulated endlessly when the moonlight flashed on it. Wonderful saber! Joshu complimented loudly. To be honest, this sharp standard long saber resembled the standard long sabers he had made previously. The only difference was that this saber was a little brighter. Even Joshu himself might not be able to pick it out from a bunch of standard long sabers. However, none of this mattered. This saber was his creation. Was it overboard to praise it? Can a sharp standard long saber cut through iron as easily as it does mud? Joshu weighed the sharp standard long saber in his hand. His gaze fell on a standard long saber that had been forged earlier, and he seemed eager to try the new saber out on it. But despite a long period of hesitation, he didn't slash down. He had put in so much time and effort to create the sharp standard long saber. Wouldn't he cry to death if he damaged it? Let's go to the testing ground and put the saber to the test. Joshu took the sharp standard long saber, locked the yard door, and proceeded toward the workshop. A few moments later, along the way, striking sounds echoed in the night. Almost every apprentice was putting in extra hours to complete their task. The physical punishment of failing to complete the task was unbearable. Joshu looked at the apprentices' residences, which resembled a piece of tofu. His yearning to get out of this circumstance grew even stronger. He would eventually die of exhaustion in this slum-like apprentice workshop if he didn't leave. He tightened his grip on the sharp standard long saber. It determined whether or not he would be able to change his situation. Inside the apprentice workshop, there was an open area for weapon testing. The weapons forging apprentices had to pass a series of tests before being handed over to the military. The tests would take place on this testing ground. Although it was late at night, scattered forging apprentices were still experimenting with the weapons they had forged. They didn't have a choice. The forging division's quality control was exceedingly tight, and no one would be able to avoid being whipped if their forged weapon was found to be inadequate. The forging apprentices' expressions were all drab, and they had no reaction when they saw Joshu. Joshu wasn't surprised. He walked over to a wooden human-shaped stake, retrieved 2 sets of armor from the basket beside him, and placed them on the stake. The ability to penetrate armor was a requirement for standard long sabers. In other words, a saber would only be regarded as qualified if it could slash through a set of armor. The more layers of armor the weapon could penetrate, the sharper the saber. Sabers that could break through 2 layers of armor were already the best standard weapon, according to Joshu's predecessor's memory. His predecessor had never seen a standard long saber capable of slashing through 3 layers of armor. Sharp standard long saber. If it's going to be labeled sharp, it should be able to break through at least 2 layers of armor, right? Joshu thought as he furiously cut down on the wooden stake with both hands gripping the handle of his saber. Psst! There was a muffled sound, and Joshu felt his hand soften after a brief feeling of resistance. He took a stumbling step forward and almost sprained his waist. His movement caused the forging apprentices testing their weapons around him to turn their heads and look over. Sorry, my bad, Joshu said apologetically to everyone. Crack! There was a dull sound before he finished speaking. Seemingly in slow motion, the wooden stake behind him split in half. A smooth incision appeared as the upper part slipped down diagonally, and the 2 layers of armor fastened to the wooden stake both dropped to the ground at once, creating a cloud of dust. The apprentices in the vicinity all widened their eyes in disbelief. Breaking through 2 layers of armor, someone exclaimed. Are you blind? The wooden stake was cut off. How many layers is this? Can a standard long saber cut through a wooden stake? Could this be a ranked long saber? Quick, informed Superintendent Xiao. On the testing ground, everyone was discussing vehemently. There were even a few people who bolted from the scene. As for the perpetrator, Joshu remained standing there dazed, staring at the wooden stake that had been cut into 2. Chapter 3, Benefits Move the Hearts of People. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, did you forge this saber? A man in his 30s with an average figure asked while caressing the saber with his fingers. Yes, Joshu replied in a dazed manner. His gaze traveled around the wooden stake. He had chopped the wooden stake, which was approximately half a meter in diameter, in half. Although this body had been forging since an early age and was considered strong, it was only at the level of an ordinary adult in terms of strength. Was it because the blade was too sharp? This didn't make sense. Joshu felt that his scientific knowledge was being challenged. Any blade, no matter how sharp, had to be used with enough force to cut through a wooden stake. This was basic physics knowledge from middle school. But since this wasn't Earth, perhaps the rules of physics were different? Indeed, there appeared to be unmatched experts here, capable of flying through the air and burrowing beneath the ground. Your name is Joshu? Xiao Zongshui continued asking. Yes. Joshu nodded. Your grandfather is Zhou Guangzu, and your father is Zhou Niantong. Yes. Joshu had no idea what this superintendent was looking for, but he answered truthfully. Xiao Zongshui was the workshop's superintendent and Joshu's superior. Joshu's fate was in his hands. Both of them were adept. What a pity. Xiao Zongshui nodded and went on. You're not too shabby either. Even though this saber is unranked, it is a top-tier standard long saber. Top-tier standard long saber. Joshu was a little disappointed. It was just a top-tier standard long saber. With this saber, becoming a forging master appeared to be impossible. But his disappointment was fleeting. With the legendary Armament Canon, it was only a matter of time before he became a forging master. How powerful would ranked weapons be if a top-tier standard long saber was already so powerful? Joshu's hopes to become a forging master intensified. Xiao Zongshui sized up Joshu. Given your age, being able to forge a top-tier standard long saber without the assistance of a master means that your ability surpasses that of your grandfather and father. Perhaps you'll become a genuine forging master one day. Then, I must thank Superintendent Xiao for your nurturing, Joshu said while cupping his hands. I didn't nurture you. With a smile that wasn't quite a smile, Xiao Zongshui stared at Joshu. Your father and grandfather don't think as vividly as you do. It's no surprise you were able to forge such a top-tier standard long saber. You flatter me, Joshu said awkwardly. In his previous life, he had never been able to suck up to others. All right, performing your job well is more important to me than saying anything, Xiao Zongshui said and waved his hand. This top-tier standard long saber is of exceptional quality. One can compare to several ordinary standard long sabers. In the future, one top-tier standard long saber can replace 3 ordinary standard long sabers, provided you forge this kind of top-tier standard long saber." Then with his hands behind his back, Xiao Zongshui walked away. Who knew whether on purpose or not, but he didn't return the sharp standard long saber in his hand to Joshu. Instead, he took it. "Exploiter Xiao?" Joshu spat inwardly after Xiao Zongshui left. A sharp standard long saber was comparable to 10 ordinary standard long sabers. But when it came to Xiao Zongshui, it could only compare to 3. How black-hearted? Joshu finally calmed a little after cursing a few times. A sharp standard long saber could replace 3 ordinary standard long sabers. His original task every month was to submit 100 standard long sabers. In other words, now he had to hand over 33 sharp standard long sabers. The complexity of forging these 2 sabers seemed similar to Joshu. To put it another way, his workload had drastically reduced, and he no longer needed to work overtime to forge weapons. At the very least, his sudden death crisis was resolved. After returning to his kennel, Joshu tossed and turned on his hard wooden bed, unable to sleep. After spending a long time studying the legendary Armament Canon, he decided to get out of bed. He walked over to the shed and got to work. Not long later, a sharp standard long saber appeared in his hand again. Joshu wore a contented look on his face. He appeared to have truly grasped the method of forging sharp standard long sabers. Even if he solely used this method in the future, he could still make a livelihood. In the forging division, whoosh! Joshu was admiring his work when the sound of wind breaking behind him startled him. He bowed his head reflexively, and a rush of wind blew past the back of his head. Even his scalp hurt. Bang! A muffled sound came from the anvil in front of him, as if something had slammed into it. Joshu's back was immediately drenched in cold sweat. It was obvious from the sound that the object was extremely heavy. If he hadn't dodged quickly, it would have hit his head instead of the anvil. "Who is it?" Joshu yelled while abruptly turning around. "It's best if you don't move." An ominous voice sounded in Joshu's ear. "Don't force me. I don't want your life." Opposite Joshu was a tall thin man. With a hammer in his hand, he glared at Joshu with a steely glance. The hammer was the size of an adult's head, and the handle was almost as tall as the man. If he swung this thing, Joshu could see his head being blasted to bits like a watermelon. His entire body shuddered, and he instinctively gripped the sharp standard long saber in his hand. Only then did he feel a little safer. "Who are you? What are you trying to do?" Joshu shouted, trying to draw the attention of the other apprentices with his voice. Unfortunately, his plan didn't work. As though no one heard his words, the clanking noises surrounding him continued. The tall thin man opposite Joshu had a mocking grin on his face. "There's no need to waste your energy. Before dawn, no one will care even if you scream until your throat cracks." Joshu's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know why this man was so certain, but he knew no one would come to his rescue anytime soon. "The money is hidden beneath the bed. If you want it, go ahead and take it." Joshu screamed while pointing at the wooden bed in the room. "I'm not interested in money. Hand over the forging formula of the top-tier standard long saber, and I will spare your life," the tall thin man said, his triangular eyes flickering with a malevolent gleam. As he approached Joshu, the tall thin man wielded his big hammer. He didn't appear to be afraid of the long saber in Joshu's hand at all. No matter how good a weapon was, it was only as good as the person wielding it. The tall thin man clearly didn't take Joshu seriously. Joshu's heart sank. He came for the weapon's secret forging formula. "I only forged the sharp standard long saber a few hours ago, yet someone is already tempted? This is the forging division's workshop. How does he dare?" The sharp standard long saber's exposure was beyond Joshu's expectations. He wouldn't have gone to the testing ground to test the saber if he had realized it was that sharp. He also hadn't expected the news to spread so quickly. Not only did the superintendent, Xiao Zongshui, show up and take the saber away, but now, this guy, who appeared to be a forging apprentice, came to rob him? Joshu locked his gaze on the tall thin man. This person was unfamiliar to him. The forging division has a total of 108 workshops, and the number of apprentices in the 97th workshop alone was in the hundreds. He couldn't possibly have seen so many people before. Even if they knew each other, this tall thin man would probably be unconcerned about their relationship. Bang! The tall thin man's large hammer slammed heavily on the ground, creating a dull thud. The man appeared feeble, but his strength wasn't negligible. The massive hammer was as light as a feather in his grip. Is it worth it for the formula of an unranked weapon? Joshu clutched the sharp standard long saber in his hand while peering intently at the tall thin man. Humph! The tall thin man snorted coldly. He wouldn't dare to rob a ranked weapons forging formula. Only forging masters and above were capable of holding the forging formulas for ranked weapons. Even if he seized one, he wouldn't be able to keep it. But forging masters wouldn't be concerned with this. Top-tier standard weapons formula, and it was valuable enough to improve people's circumstances. This was the most suitable item for an ordinary forging apprentice. The tall thin man had no desire to explain himself to Joshu. He clutched the hammer's handle and fixed his gaze on Joshu like a hawk. He said harshly, "Give me the secret formula. The secret forging formula is here. Come get it yourself if you want it." Joshu pointed at his own head. In the blink of an eye, he had both hands on the handle of the sharp standard long saber and took the initiative to attack the tall thin man. Joshu didn't know martial arts, but he was young and strong. Plus, he wielded a powerful weapon. Using brute force to attack, he was also incredibly strong. The tall thin man's visage was full of contempt. Despite the fact that they were both forging apprentices, there was still a distinction between individuals. His forefather had received expert guidance and had learned a set of martial arts. Although his legacy dwindled over the years, the combat ability of the tall thin man still considerably outstripped that of ordinary people. He was considered invincible among the forging apprentices. Ordinary people would be scared by Joshu's attack. But was he an ordinary person? The tall thin man sneered. He swung his arm, and the enormous hammer raised high. He was confident that this hammer attack would be able to break a couple of Joshu's ribs, as well as knock away the standard long saber in his hands. Ding! The hammer and the standard long saber collided with a sharp sound. The tall thin man seemed to already see the standard long saber fly away and Joshu wailing as he fell to the ground. A cruel and savage grin appeared on his face. Suddenly, his nasty grin froze on his face, and his eyes filled with terror and disbelief. Bang! The enormous hammer fell to the ground. On the tall thin man's chest, a visible line of blood emerged. The stream of blood continued to extend, and blood gushed out a few moments later. How is this possible? The tall thin man left behind his final words in the mortal world before collapsing to the ground with a thud. He died with unresolved resentment? The sharp standard long saber you forged effectively completed a kill. You are rewarded with a cultivation technique, the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique. The legendary armament cannon surfaced in front of Joshu's eyes automatically. It flipped to the page with the sharp standard long saber, and a line of text emerged on the page. Suddenly, a slew of silhouettes jumping around materialized in front of Joshu's eyes, and a vast amount of data slammed into his head at the same time. Chapter 4, Dragon Elephant Prajna Technique Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Crack? The standard long saber in Joshu's hand released a crisp sound as it broke in two. Half of the saber fell and plunged a few inches into the ground. Joshu was unconcerned about the long saber's demise. His entire focus was on the information that suddenly appeared in his head. Dragon Elephant Prajna Technique. Thanks to his predecessor's memories, Joshu had long known that elite martial arts existed in this world. But before this, he didn't know if he would be able to survive, so why would he fantasize about unattainable things? He had never imagined he would be able to gain a cultivation technique in such a situation. The weapons I forge provide such benefits after killing an enemy? Joshu's entire being became enthralled. Even the unpleasant sensation of killing someone diminished. He had believed that becoming a forging master would reverse his fate. But he now understood that the precious stone lands its innocent possessor in jail. Being a forging master with only forging techniques and formulas while having no ability to defend himself might not be such a good idea. The sharp standard long saber was not even a ranked weapon, but others had already coveted it. What would happen if it was a ranked weapon? Forging apprentices with strong backgrounds might not be afraid, but Joshu was different. He was not protected in Great Xia. What had just happened was proof. He had just taken out a sharp standard long saber, but someone had soon come to confront him about the secret forging formula. If the standard long saber's sharpness hadn't been so exceptional, the outcome might not have been so favorable. Because the sharp standard long saber could cut through iron as easily as it did mud, and it could even cut through the hammer, the tall thin man had been caught off guard and killed. Otherwise, Joshu might not have been his opponent. I can't let myself be in such a dangerous situation again. Joshu still felt some apprehension when he remembered the incident. This feeling of his life hanging on a knife's edge was something he didn't want to go through again. You receive a reward of 2 years of cultivation because the sharp standard long saber you forged effectively completed a kill. Another voice broke out in Joshu's mind. Simultaneously, his danshin seemed to erupt as a powerful force appeared out of nowhere, and energy spread throughout his body in an instant. Crack! Joshu felt as though one of the shackles in his body broke. An unending stream of energy surged out from his danshin, and his entire body appeared to be brimming with vitality. Even his vision and hearing were much sharper than before. Joshu's eyes twinkled. He took a step forward and waved his arm. The broken saber in his hand instantly slashed the anvil in front of him. He forged on this anvil most of the time. It was thick and heavy in an unprecedented way. It had also been tempered 1,000 times, making it as tough as heavenly weapons. Joshu's saber cleaved the thick anvil as though it was tofu, splitting it into the size of an infant's head with a whoosh. Bang! The iron fell to the ground, sending dust flying everywhere. Shu heard a few frantic footsteps outside the yard walls at just about the same time. Tonight, the tall thin man wasn't the only one with a greedy heart. He had merely acted the quickest and had also died the quickest. The death of the tall thin man and Joshu's strike had scared away the rest of the people with hidden agendas. This is too dangerous. Joshu felt a lingering fear in his heart. I didn't think the forging division would be this scary. I didn't realize that when people get greedy, they have no concerns. Joshu looked at the corpse on the ground, but he wasn't too worried. One reaped what one sowed. Those who killed others were always killed. This person had attacked him first, and he had merely counterattacked. This was reasonable. Furthermore, Xiao Zongshui had just taken away his saber. How could he refuse to assist him in resolving such a minor issue? My sharp standard long saber didn't kill anyone again. Why is there another reward? Was it the other saber? Joshu mused, putting other thoughts aside. He had forged 2 sharp standard long sabers. When he killed the tall thin man, one of them had broken, while the other had been taken by Superintendent Xiao Zongshui. Since he didn't kill anyone now, it was only natural to assume that Xiao Zongshui had killed someone. It appears that I can obtain rewards even if others use the weapons I forged to slay. Joshu felt that he was getting a better grasp on how to use the legendary Armament Canon. In that case, as long as I forge and distribute enough weapons. His eyes gleamed. By just forging 2 sharp standard long sabers, he had attained the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique and 2 years of cultivation. If he forged 200, he was getting excited just thinking about it. Doesn't this mean that everyone who uses a weapon I forge is effectively working for me? The Dragon Elephant Prajna technique has 13 levels. I have 2 years of cultivation now, and I have only mastered the first level. I will need 4 years to master the second level. The third level will take 8 years, and the fourth will take 16. Under normal circumstances, I won't be able to reach the 13th level for the rest of my life. But this aim isn't tough to achieve with the legendary Armament Canon. The first level of the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique gave him the power of 1 dragon and 1 elephant. This was an exaggeration, but his current strength was still equivalent to hundreds of caddies. His prior strike wouldn't have had the same impact if not for this. After all, no matter how sharp a weapon was, its power depended on the person wielding it. He didn't have to worry about any forging apprentices endangering his life because he had the might of 1 dragon and 1 elephant now. But forging apprentices were solely at the entry level of the forging division. The majority of them were just average folks. Numerous people were stronger than them, and the first level of the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique was far from sufficient. This world, according to the scattered legends in his predecessor's memory, was a world of elite martial arts. Even if he reached the highest level of the Dragon and Elephant Prajna technique, he might not be invincible, much less being only at the first level. It's safer for me to stay in the forging division until I gain sufficient strength. Joshu rationalized. Even though there are people here with hidden agendas, they don't dare to act rashly. Plus, it's only here that I can freely forge and distribute weapons. The forging divisions Weapons would be delivered to the 3 military forces of Great Xia. Normally, there would be a slew of battles, and they would certainly kill foes with the weapons in their hands. It was unrealistic to expect all 3 military forces to use the weapons he forged. But his gains would already be unthinkable if hundreds or thousands of people used the weapons he forged to kill enemies. If I stay in the forging division, Joshu used his past life habits to assess the situation's benefits and drawbacks. I used to believe that if I became a forging master, I would receive preferential treatment as a skilled craftsman. Now, it appears that I've simplified things too much. Unlike in my previous life, this isn't an era of peace. But even back then, there were many people who would do anything for the sake of benefits. The forging formulas of ranked weapons are things that can be passed down from one generation to another of forging masters. Their value is immeasurable. Not to mention how I'll explain the origins of the secret forging formulas. I have no idea how many people will come for the secret formulas because I don't have any background. A sharp standard long saber is only a top-tier standard weapon. Forging masters might not take a liking to it. But if it's forging formulas for ranked weapons, even forging masters will be tempted. A forging master's strength is far greater than that of a forging apprentice. Likely, the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique's initial level won't be able to handle one. So I can't advance to forging master until I have enough strength to defend myself. I have to keep it a secret, even if I can forge ranked weapons. Joshu analyzed the pros and cons of the situation in his mind. He was confident that he could become a forging master with a legendary armament cannon, even if it only contained the formula for one weapon now. But looking at things now, rushing to become a forging master wasn't a good idea. To begin with, it was strange that a forging apprentice could quickly ascend to the rank of forging master without the help of a master. People were already coveting the sharp standard long saber just by demonstrating it. Who knew how many people would react if secret forging formulas for ranked weapons appeared? Joshu didn't want to be captured and interrogated. Furthermore, he had been rushing to become a forging master previously because he was afraid of dying young from overwork. He no longer had to be concerned about this issue. He had mastered the first level of the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique. Putting everything else aside, with his current strength, would he be tired to death if he forged 3 to 5 weapons a day like he was playing a game? This was impossible. Completing the meager amount for the task required of forging apprentices was a piece of cake for the current forging apprentice Joshu. I'll stay in the forging division as an apprentice and do my best to forge some sharp standard long sabers to accumulate my strength. Until I have absolute confidence, I won't advance to forging master, Joshu contemplated. At the same time, in a luxurious residence not too far from Shu's workshop, Xiao Zongshui flicked his wrist in the courtyard of the mansion, and the blood on the long saber fell to the ground. The blade was shiny and clean once again. A black dog nearly half the height of a human dropped to the ground just in front of him, the head and body severed. Xiao Zongshui had tested the saber on a living creature. Clang! He flicked his finger on the saber, and a melodious sound rang out. He nodded contentedly. This saber is much sharper than I anticipated. Ordinary standard long sabers can already penetrate through a layer of armor, which isn't too bad. But this saber is capable of penetrating 3 layers of armor and instantly killing a fleshy body without any resistance. This Joshu is truly exceptional. I already gave up on competing, but I wasn't expecting Joshu to offer me a ray of hope. Xiao Zongshui deliberated. This saber might actually work. Xiao Zongshui tossed his sleeves, pushed open the door, and strode toward the forging apprentice's residential area, seemingly having made a decision. Chapter 5, Superintendent Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Sizzle. Joshu plunged his crimson blade into the tank of cold water. The entire work shed was filled with a white steam. The blade slashed through the air with a faint sound as he flicked his wrist. 2 hours? Joshu looked at the long saber in his hand with a satisfied expression. He forged a new one after the previous sharp standard long saber was ruined. He kept track of how long it took to forge one this time. He had completed the full forging process in just 2 hours. If it was before, he would have required at least 6 hours to make a sharp standard saber. After mastering the first level of the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique, his weapon forging efficiency had grown by 3 times. Most notably, forging a sharp standard long blade used to leave him exhausted, and he had to take a long break from forging before he could resume. He didn't feel tired at all this time. Even if he had to forge another sharp standard long saber, he believed that his stamina would be sufficient. The Dragon Elephant Prajna technique is more powerful than I anticipated. Joshu was overjoyed. It won't be difficult for me to forge 5 or 6 sharp standard long sabers a day if I unleash my full power. As a result, completing the forging division's monthly task became significantly easier. To complete his monthly task, he simply needed to spend 4 to 6 hours a day forging. Wouldn't it be nice to spend the rest of the time relaxing? Bang, bang, bang. A knock on the door jolted Joshu out of his reverie. Joshu frowned slightly. Today isn't the day to collect weapons. Who would come looking for me? He subconsciously glanced at the tall thin man's corpse in the corner. He had yet to dispose of the body. Could it be someone else with a hidden agenda? Joshu raised his guard, but he didn't panic or fear. He was no longer the same person he had been the night before, although it had only been a night. He wielded a sharp standard long saber and had mastered the first level of the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique. He would be able to take on 10 regular forging apprentices. Joshu opened the door a notch while concealing the sharp standard long saber behind him. What time is it already? Are you still sleeping? Why did it take you so long to open the door? Xiao Zongshui reprimanded as soon as the door opened. Joshu cursed in his heart. What time is it? In my previous life, it's only 6 in the morning. If I am not sleeping at 6, am I supposed to be working? Why are you here, Superintendent? Joshu said directly, pretending not to hear Xiao Zongshui's criticism. The only response Joshu received from Xiao Zongshui was him walking right through the door and into his work shed. Joshu leaped in terror. The corpse of the tall thin man was still there. He would have thrown the corpse into the fire and burned it. Had he known Xiao Zongshui was coming today? I was too careless. His mind raced as he prepared to deal with Xiao Zongshui's questions. In the end, Xiao Zongshui simply gave a cursory glance at the corpse before shifting his focus to Joshu's freshly forged saber. Xiao Zongshui yelled, "Give it to me." Joshu was stunned for a moment before blurting out, "What? Saber?" Xiao Zongshui said impatiently. "Oh, okay." Joshu handed over the sharp standard long saber in his hand without hesitation. Joshu wouldn't have given the saber away so readily if it had been someone else. But this was his superior, who was also the 97th Workshop's local tyrant. It didn't matter to him whether Joshu had the saber or not if he wanted to kill him. Xiao Zongshui slashed down with the saber. The blade gleamed momentarily as the sharp standard long saber struck Joshu's anvil. Pfft! With a soft sound, the 2-foot square anvil was split into 2. Joshu was speechless as he looked at the smooth surface. He had forged the sharp standard long saber, so he knew precisely how powerful it was. If it was just a regular person holding the saber, cutting through 3 layers of armor would be the limit. The strength of the individual wielding the saber determined their ability to cut through iron as easily as it did mud. He had accomplished the first level of the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique, and his strength was significantly higher than before. He had exerted all of his strength the night before, but he had only managed to sever a piece of the anvil. Xiao Zongshui's casual swing had cut the anvil in 2. As expected, he knows martial arts. Joshu had long suspected that Xiao Zongshui was no ordinary person, but it now appeared that he was at least more powerful than him. The sharpness of this saber is unrivaled among standard weapons. The sturdiness, on the other hand, Xiao Zongshui frowned. Following his words, the long saber in his palm snapped into 2. Joshu's heart was bleeding. He had given up his sleeve to forge it. He had intended to hide it away and use it for self-defense. Superintendent is right, Joshu muttered while cursing exploiter Xiao in his heart. Joshu was well aware of the issue pointed out by Xiao Zongshui. A sharp standard long saber had significantly more sharpness than a standard long saber, but its sturdiness was mediocre, and it might be readily destroyed if hacked with force. Win some, lose some. After all, this was only a standard long saber. However, it's not easy to forge such a sharp standard long saber with existing materials, Xiao Zongshui continued. Joshu, get ready to accompany me out. Without waiting for Joshu to agree, Xiao Zongshui threw away the broken saber in his hand and strode out with his hands behind his back. His foot had already crossed the threshold when he abruptly stopped. Take care of the corpse. Don't leave it there. In an hour, come find me. Xiao Zongshui walked away slowly. Xiao Zongshui hadn't asked who the tall thin man was, why he had died in Joshu's work shed, or who had killed him. Although the tall thin man had died in Joshu's hands, his heart was full of sorrow. A life was lost just like that, and no one questioned it. This world is no longer the earth of my past life. Here, human lives are worthless. Joshu realized the cruelness of this world once more. What does Xiao Zongshui want me to do? Joshu sensed danger. He had only mastered the first level of the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique. It was far from enough in terms of self-preservation. It should be related to the sharp standard long saber. From the way Xiao Zongshui behaved, the possibility of danger is low. Xiao Zongshui was the superintendent of the 97th workshop. He was like the supreme leader in this workshop. He didn't have to hide anything in front of Joshu, and he didn't need to go around in circles if he intended to harm Joshu. As Joshu recalled Xiao Zongshui's every action, he came to the conclusion that Xiao Zongshui looking for him wasn't necessarily a negative thing. After he contemplated for a bit, his gaze fell on the tall thin man's corpse. Xiao Zongshui demanded that he dispose of the body. How was he going to do this? Toss it into the furnace and let it burn? He couldn't possibly do it. In the future, he would have to use this furnace to forge. How was he going to use it after burning a corpse? Bury it? Just thinking about it made Joshu nervous. Would he still be able to sleep if a corpse was buried in his courtyard? Just as he was thinking, a couple of drudgers appeared in his courtyard and entered without a word. They lifted the tall thin man's corpse and left. Joshu didn't stop them. Instead, he heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed Xiao Zongshui was quite meticulous, dispatching workers to dispose of the body. After resolving this major issue, Joshu washed his face and proceeded towards Xiao Zongshui's residence. Chapter 6, Name of the Saber Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, don't talk too much later, and follow my instructions. Do you understand? Xiao Zongshui said in a deep voice when they were in a carriage. Sitting across from him, Joshu nodded. Understood. The carriage moved forward. Although Joshu was sitting in the carriage, his heart was already outside. He would have popped his head out long ago if it wasn't for Xiao Zongshui. Joshu had been in this world for some time, yet he had never left the forging division's workshop. The spectacular scenery of the Great Xia piqued his curiosity. While Joshu was imagining Great Xia's beauty, the carriage proceeded for over 2 hours before coming to a halt. Xiao Zongshui got out of the carriage first, followed by Joshu. Joshu saw the wilderness instead of the bustling capital he had anticipated. The valley was surrounded by lush green mountains, and there was a military camp not far away. Barracks? Joshu's heart stirred. The forging division's relationship with the military should be that the forging division supplied all the weapons it forged to the 3 military forces of Great Xia. Why was he brought here? Despite his confusion, Joshu didn't ask any questions since Xiao Zongshui had already told him to mind his words. He silently trailed after Xiao Zongshui while observing his surroundings. When Xiao Zongshui arrived at the camp's entrance, he presented his token, and they were admitted. Groups of soldiers were training in a frenzy within the military camp. Joshu didn't think there was anything exceptional about the way they trained. They did nothing but chop and chop. Xiao Zongshui seemed to know the camp quite well. He brought Joshu through the training grounds and into a large tent. Xiao Zongshui yelled, "General Cheng, Xiao Zongshui requests an audience. Come in." A gruff voice sounded. Before entering the large tent, Xiao Zongshui cast a glance at Joshu. Joshu followed closely behind. As soon as he walked into the tent, he spotted Xiao Zongshui bowing to a towering and imposing general. General Cheng. Xiao Zongshui was bending over, and his body was practically at a 90-degree angle. His superior was already acting this way, so Joshu couldn't be too different. He cupped his hands and greeted, just as Xiao Zongshui was doing. At ease. General Cheng waved and turned his focus from the sand table to Xiao Zongshui. Why did you return? He asked in puzzlement. General Cheng, this time I'm still here for the weapon issue, Xiao Zongshui said. Of course I know it's for armaments, General Cheng replied. How else am I related to your forging division? My requirements were not met by the weapons you provided. Your 97th workshop will not be supplying weapons to my army, General Cheng continued with a shake of his head. Joshu was perplexed. Why does it sound like Xiao Zongshui is here to promote weapons? Surely the forging division doesn't have to forge the weapons and sell them themselves? Although Zhou Shu was a forging apprentice of the forging division, forging apprentices were the division's lowest existences and had no idea how it operated. In the forging division, all he needed to know was how many weapons he needed to forge each month. Apprentices had no idea where the weapons they forged ended up. Have you decided on a weapon, General? Xiao Zongshui was undeterred. Not yet. With a shake of his head, General Cheng expressed his dissatisfaction with the situation. A few weapons have been delivered from 73rd, 86th, and 89th workshops, but they're all barely satisfactory. I've been given orders to establish the Imperial Guards to ensure the Blessed Palace's safety. Naturally, I must use extraordinary caution when selecting weapons. Zhou Shu listened in a daze, but he had no right to open his mouth and ask questions. He could only conjecture in his heart. Zhou Shu had some understanding of the workshops that General Cheng mentioned. Great Xiao's forging division had a total of 108 workshops, and among them, official forging masters populated the first 36 workshops. There were also more than enough grand craftsmen among them, and they were in charge of making ranked weapons. The remaining 72 workshops, including the 97th workshop where Zhou Shu worked, were in charge of forging standard weapons. Different workshops were skilled at forging different types of armaments. Some were skilled at forging swords, while others at creating firearms. There were others proficient at forging spears, and still more were good at forging bows and arrows. Zhou Shu served at the 97th workshop, which specialized in saber forging. Zhou Shu sensed something from General Cheng's statements. General Cheng was putting together a troop, and the forging division's workshops were battling it out to be the weapon supplier. Based on his work experience in his past life, it was easy to figure out that being the weapon supplier was a lucrative job. Xiao Zongshui and the others wouldn't have come to seize this job if this wasn't the case. General, the saber is the monarch of all weapons. In my opinion, it is the most appropriate weapon for the Imperial Guards. Xiao Zongshui expressed his thoughts. Before he could finish, General Cheng interjected. I've made my point. The 97th workshop sabers do not match my criteria, Superintendent Xiao. You can equip an ordinary army with the standard long sabers you've forged, but my Imperial Guards are elites among elites. You have misunderstood, General Cheng. Xiao Zongshui shook his head. I know the standard long sabers I brought before weren't worthy of your elites, so I brought the new saber that the 97th workshop has been working on for years. Oh. General Cheng remained uninterested. What kind of weapon could a group of forging apprentices be capable of forging? General, please have a look. With both hands, Xiao Zongshui held a saber in front of General Cheng. Zhou Shu could see that the saber was the sharp standard long saber that Xiao Zongshui had taken away from him. He couldn't stop himself from rolling his eyes internally. How did the saber I forged become the new weapon that the 97th workshop has been developing for years? What makes this saber unique? General Cheng took the long saber and gave it a cursory glance. The sharp standard long saber appeared to be no different from an ordinary standard long saber. It was a straight saber with a single edge, akin to a tang saber. Superintendent Xiao, I'm very busy. If it's merely an old weapon, you should leave. General Cheng looked impatient. He had tried all of the standard long sabers that Xiao Zongshui had brought over before, but they couldn't meet his demands. If not for the fact that he couldn't avoid contact with the forging division in the future, and he didn't want to make things too unpleasant with the forging division, he would have chased Xiao Zongshui out already. General, this isn't the same long saber I brought over before. Xiao Zongshui explained quickly. This blade has an extremely sharp edge. Haha, General. Cheng burst out laughing. Superintendent Xiao, are you laughing at my expense? How can a saber be called a saber if it isn't sharp? General Cheng wanted to see them off. Words alone are no proof. Please try the saber, General. Xiao Zongshui rushed to speak. General Cheng frowned and looked at Xiao Zongshui. Fine, I'll give you another chance, he finally said. Bring in the armor, men. A few soldiers promptly dragged in a wooden stake that had 2 layers of leather armor on it. Superintendent Xiao, if your saber can penetrate 2 layers of armor, what harm is there in me using it? General Cheng said. Standard weapons that could break through the first layer of armor were already considered exemplary. Even with General Cheng's expansive horizons, he had yet to encounter many standard weapons capable of breaking 2 layers of armor. Standard long sabers that broke 2 layers of armor were definitely qualified to equip the Imperial Guards. General, let's add another layer of armor, Xiao Zongshui said, his voice deep. 3 layers of armor. For a brief moment, General Cheng was astonished. Then he exclaimed angrily, Superintendent Xiao, enough is enough. Standard weapons were forged using the most ordinary metals. Breaking through 2 layers of armor was extremely difficult. How was it possible to break through 3 layers? General, what's the harm in giving it a shot? Xiao Zongshui said seriously. Very good. For a long time, General Cheng narrowed his eyes and stared at Xiao Zongshui. Then he waved his hand, and a soldier put another layer of leather armor on the wooden stake. You do it. General Cheng handed the saber to a soldier. He was a strong man, and he wouldn't be able to test the weapon's sharpness if he tested it himself. After gauging its weight, the soldier slashed out with the long saber. He didn't use all of his power. Instead, he kept his strength under control to the level of a normal adult. This was also a rule for determining a weapon's sharpness. Only in this manner would the weapon's strength, not the user's, be assessed. Psst. The long saber traced a dazzling line in the air before striking the leather armor with its blade. The saber cut the thick leather armor like tofu. The blade slid into the leather armor almost instantaneously, then into the wooden stake. Bang! Something dropped to the ground with a muted sound. General Cheng's expression changed. He took a step forward, crossing a few meters, shoved the soldier aside, and reached for the sharp standard long saber. He yanked the long saber embedded in the wooden stake with some force on his wrist. Crack! The 3 layers of leather armor split open at the chest and dropped to the ground, and the wooden stake had a deep cut in it. The sharp standard long saber cleaved through the wooden stake with a swoosh as General Cheng flipped his wrist. The heavy wooden stake slid down diagonally, appearing to move in slow motion, to reveal a smooth, almost mirror-like surface. Wonderful saber! General Cheng couldn't help exclaiming. What a sharp saber! Superintendent Xiao, is this the new saber your workshop developed? What is it called? It? Xiao Zongshui hesitated for a moment. This saber didn't have a name. General, the name of this saber is Huben. Xiao Zongshui was racking his wits when he heard a voice. Huben means fighter. General's Imperial Guards guard the palace, so they are Huben warriors, the voice added. Huben sabers and Huben troops go together like a dream. General, who else besides your Huben troops is deserving of the Huben saber? Chapter 7, Huben Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Huben. General Cheng contemplated. Slowly, his eyes lit up. Huben saber, what a great saber! What a greater name! General Cheng burst into laughter. Xiao Zongshui looked at Joshu in astonishment. Joshu tended to surprise him. This name, Huben saber, had a lot of appeal. Superintendent Xiao, this is? General Cheng inquired while pointing at Joshu. He had, of course, seen Joshu earlier, but he had thought that Joshu was Xiao Zongshui's assistant. With his status, he naturally wouldn't be too concerned about assistants. It wasn't until Joshu spoke that he became conscious of his presence. He's an apprentice at the 97th workshop. His name is Joshu. Xiao Zongshui introduced. Joshu contributed significantly to the development of this Huben saber. Joshu was taken aback. He never expected Xiao Zongshui to say something like this. He was already prepared for Xiao Zongshui to take full credit for the sharp standard long saber. After all, he was the superintendent of the workshop. He never imagined that Xiao Zongshui would give him credit. Although he didn't mention that the sharp standard long saber was forged by Joshu himself, his mention of the contribution was vital and already great. For the time being, Joshu wouldn't ask for more. Oh, is that so? General Cheng didn't suspect anything. He nodded. He's a promising talent. This was merely a polite remark. He had simply inquired about Joshu's identity in response to his comments. General Cheng had no intention of becoming acquainted with Joshu. After asking for Joshu's name, he turned to Xiao Zongshui. Superintendent Xiao, how much does this Huben saber cost? General Cheng asked. He adored the Huben saber so much that he couldn't put it down. Huben sabers are slightly more expensive to produce than standard long sabers, Xiao Zongshui said. 1. Costs 3 taels of silver. 3 taels. General Chang raised his eyebrows. Joshu was stunned. Charging 3 taels is robbery? Joshu had personally forged the Huben saber, which was actually a sharp standard long blade. He knew how much it cost. It simply cost a few caddies of iron. The rest of the expenses were practically negligible. Despite the high cost of iron, forging a Huben saber cost less than half a tael of silver. The cost of a Huben saber, including the cost of coal and the wages of apprentices, was less than 1 tael. What else could he be doing other than robbing money by asking for a high price of 3 taels of silver? Joshu's good impression of Xiao Zongshui dissipated almost instantly. Exploiter Xiao demanded that he forge 30 Huben sabers monthly. 3 taels of silver for every saber equaled 90 taels? How much was his monthly salary? Half a tael of silver. Xiao Zongshui was ruthless. 3 taels isn't too much for this Huben saber, General Cheng said. How many can you supply each month? General Cheng was an expert in his own right. He didn't just pay attention to the cost of production but also the speed of production. He wanted the Huben sabers, and he intended to equip his soldiers with them, but it would be meaningless if there were too few of them. Forging a Huben saber is a difficult task. In the 97th workshop, Joshu is already the most skilled forging apprentice, yet this Huben saber took him more than 4 hours to forge. Xiao Zongshui pointed at Joshu and commended him again. Joshu rolled his eyes. Internally, it's pointless to place me on a pedestal. Simply increase my pay. Huben sabers are far more intricate and difficult to forge than standard long sabers. Only a handful of apprentices in the 97th workshop are capable of forging them. Xiao Zongshui was lying through his teeth. Joshu possessed the secret formula for the sharp standard long saber. No one else in the workshop could forge it except him. General Cheng was oblivious of this and unconcerned about it. Just tell me how long it will take you to hand over 3,000 Huben sabers. Joshu could only make 1 Huben saber per day, supposedly. It would take 10 years to make 3,000. General Cheng clearly couldn't wait 10 years. 3,000. Xiao Zongshui's face lit up. Half a year, no, 3 months. I can deliver 3,000 Huben sabers in 3 months. Joshu wanted to curse. What does exploiter Xiao mean? To turn in 3,000 Huben sabers in 3 months, he had to forge 1,000 per month, which meant 30 per day. He wouldn't be able to forge this amount even if he died trying. Very good. General Cheng nodded. If you can hand over 3,000 Huben sabers in 3 months, this Huben saber will be the Huben troops' standard issue weapon in the future. General Cheng flicked the blade. The blade made a clear sound as it buzzed. He was also a shameless person. He utilized the name Huben brazenly as his own. These people didn't even pay copyright fees. Joshu cursed. Joshu had deduced from their talk that General Cheng was in charge of assembling an Imperial Guards unit. He hadn't decided on the designation yet, but he had taken up the Huben troops brand. In that case, thank you, General. Xiao Zongshui was ecstatic. 3,000 Huben sabers was 9,000 taels of silver. This was a huge business. He could not only make a great profit after deducting the cost of production, but he could also obtain results. It wasn't out of the question for his rank to climb again. Don't thank me. Quite yet. General Cheng shook his head. I've seen the Huben saber. You must now prove that this Huben saber was indeed forged by your workshop. Don't tell me you obtained a saber from a forging master and ended up handing over an ordinary standard long saber to fool me. General Cheng appeared to have a lot of experience. He was concerned that the sample would differ from the finished product. Xiao Zongshui appeared to have anticipated this. He answered with a smile, of course. I brought Joshu over this time to forge a Huben saber in front of you, General. Only then did Joshu realize Xiao Zongshui had brought him to the camp to use him as a tool. Fuel and iron were plentiful in the military camp, and even a smelting furnace was ready to go. Normally, military camps also had to repair damaged weapons since new weapons couldn't be produced frequently. Joshu was well aware of his status. He was simply a worker and would carry out the orders of his supervisor. In front of everyone, he forged a sharp standard long saber. While forging, he purposefully restrained his strength, and he took much longer than when he forged the last saber. This time, the forging took 6 hours. General Cheng ordered the saber be brought over. He tested the saber this time and confirmed that it could still pierce 3 layers of armor. Only after this did he smile again. Great! With this Huben saber, my Huben troops' strength will grow by 30%. General Cheng laughed. We have finally not failed His Majesty? Superintendent Xiao, you did a fantastic job this time. It is my responsibility to serve the imperial court. A smile bloomed on Xiao Zongshui's face. Superintendent Xiao, I want this Huben saber. General Cheng's expression became serious. But I have a condition. General, please share. Xiao Zongshui withdrew his smile and spoke solemnly. In the future, you will only supply this Huben saber to my Huben troops. It will not be utilized for anything else. General Cheng said deliberately. I'll give you 4 taels of silver for each Huben saber if you can do it. If you can't, pretend you never came today. Xiao Zongshui's eyes narrowed slightly. The forging division's workshop had a lot of freedom. Every saber cost 4 taels of silver, and he could claim the expense any way he pleased. Even if he handed in 2 taels of silver, he would still have 2 taels in his pocket. It wasn't a small sum. However, General, isn't this against the rules? Xiao Zongshui said hesitantly. Rules? General Cheng sneered. This Huben saber secret forging formula was devised by your workshop, Superintendent Xiao. You have the right to deal with it under the forging division's rules, right? It will remain your private property as long as you don't give it to the forging division. It'll be up to you how you handle it. Then I'll purchase Huben saber's secret forging formula and entrust the forging to the 97th workshop. Is this in violation of the rules? Joshu, wait for me outside. General Cheng and I have something to discuss. Xiao Zongshui didn't reply to General Cheng but instead drove Joshu, who had been stunned by what he heard, out. Joshu didn't come back to his senses until he walked out of the tent. These men sure know how to live it up. Aren't they attempting to fleece the country? That's not accurate. They're even fleecing me? Joshu was indignant. The secret forging formula for the Huben saber was his, not the 97th workshop's and certainly not Xiao Zongshui's. According to the rules of the forging division, if he handed over the secret formula, he would be rewarded. But then the formula would belong to the forging division. Of course, he could choose to hand over weapons rather than the secret forging formula. Both choices had their own benefits and drawbacks, so it was impossible to decide which was better. Isn't it daylight robbery for Xiao Zongshui to take the Huben saber's forging formula for himself? What right does he have to sell the Huben saber formula to General Cheng? Joshu turned his gaze to the large tent. All right, it appears that I have no means of resisting. Either of them could easily crush him, a forging apprentice, to death. For example, the tall thin man who had attacked Joshu had died without anyone asking. However, Xiao Zongshui and General Cheng were probably unaware that, while they believed they were fleecing Joshui, he had the means to fleece them in return. How many benefits would he receive if all 3,000 Huben sabers he forged were equipped to the military? How much could it enhance his strength? Joshu would have had no idea how to disseminate his forged weapons to so many people if they didn't do this. It's just a sharp standard long saber. I'll give it to you if you want it. It's not anything I'm interested in, Joshu thought. But I'll remember this. I'll let you know sooner or later that taking advantage of me isn't easy. Chapter 8. The correct usage of the legendary Armament Canon. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Do you have any questions for me? Xiao Zongshui asked. Joshu, his face expressionless. The sky was still bright when they left the forging division workshop. It was already dark when they left the military camp. Unknowingly, they had stayed in the Huben troop camp for a full day. No, Joshu shook his head firmly. He had no idea what Xiao Zongshui and General Cheng had talked about in the tent, and he didn't care either. A worker had to have the awareness of being one. Knowing too much might not be a good thing. Really? Xiao Zongshui's eyes flashed with sarcasm. You must be thinking that the secret formula of the Huben saber is yours, so why did it end up belonging to the 97th workshop? I didn't. There is no need to deny it. Anyone would think so, Xiao Zongshui interrupted. Let me enlighten you. It's because I, Xiao Zongshui, am the superintendent of the 97th workshop. Joshu was speechless. Exploiter Xiao is taking his undeserved gain for granted? There's no need to be angry. Xiao Zongshui was unconcerned about Joshu's reaction. This is how the world works. You can't preserve the Huben saber's secret forging formula even if it's in your hands. Even if you hand over the formula, it must still go through me. Actually, You should count yourself lucky that General Cheng is interested in the Huben saber. I'll tell you the truth. If you hand over the Huben saber's secret forging formula to the Ministry of Justice, the reward will only be a few silver pennies added to your monthly income. Now, I'm not the type to keep all the benefits to myself. I'm not going to forget about your share of profit. Xiao Zongshui was very straightforward. Ultimately, he didn't forget to paint a rosy picture for Joshu. Joshu knew he was telling the truth. He wouldn't gain anything by keeping the Huben saber's secret forging formula. On the contrary, the precious stone lands its innocent possessor in jail. His current strength was still insufficient. As for the benefits Xiao Zongshui mentioned, Joshu didn't take them seriously. In his previous life, he had witnessed numerous empty promises made by bosses, but how many of them were actually kept? This is a banknote worth 100 taels of silver, and it's usable anywhere in Great Xia. Xiao Zongshui reached into his pocket and tossed a banknote into Joshu's arms. Write down the Huben saber's formula for me later. Xiao Zongshui had never considered that Joshu would refuse. In reality, Joshu had no choice but to accept. He would most likely die in the wilderness tonight if he dared to reject. The Dragon Elephant Prajna technique's first level might not be enough to beat Xiao Zongshui. Although he felt aggrieved, he kept the banknote. His monthly salary was half a tael of silver. 100 taels of silver was the equivalent of 20 years of pay. General Cheng paid a few thousand taels of silver to this bastard exploiter Xiao, and now he's going to send me away with 100 taels? Just you wait. I'll let you know sooner or later that free stuff is the most expensive. Joshu cursed. By the way, you are literate, right? Xiao Zongshui suddenly remembered. The majority of forging apprentices were from poor backgrounds, and many were illiterate. Joshu pondered. I know a little. He did spend 2 years at a private school in the past. It's good that you're literate. Don't forget to write down the secret formula. Xiao Zongshui nodded. Work hard. I won't mistreat you. Xiao Zongshui considerately ordered the coachman to bring Joshu back to the workshop. On the other hand, he got off the carriage and went to a brothel to listen to music. Joshu returned to his work shed with a large sum of 100 taels of silver in his pocket. He could only sigh as he glanced at the dilapidated slum. He had signed a contract with the forging division. Before the contract ended, unless he advanced to forging master, he would have to stay here forever. Advance to forging master? After witnessing Xiao Zongshui and General Cheng's shady dealings, he couldn't guarantee what the consequences would be if he forged a ranked weapon. He was afraid that Xiao Zongshui would snatch the secret forging formula for the ranked weapon before he could advance to forging master. After all, the value of the secret forging formula of a ranked weapon was not something a mere Huben sabers could compare with. For forging masters to be respected, they had to be a renowned forging master in the first place. It was obvious how Xiao Zongshui would treat a new forging master unknown to outsiders. You receive a reward of 2 years of cultivation because the sharp standard long saber you forged effectively completed a kill. The legendary Armament Canon appeared on its own just as Joshu was contemplating his next move. The pages flipped open, revealing the page with the sharp standard long blade. On the page, there was a line of comments. He felt his body expand as a surge of heat rushed into it. After a few seconds, he returned to normal. Another 2 years of cultivation? Joshu was ecstatic. As expected of a combat unit, they had given him such a wonderful surprise in such a short time. The 2 Huben sabers had been left with General Cheng when he and Xiao Zongshui left the Huben troop camp. He hadn't expected them to kill enemies so quickly with the Huben sabers. He didn't know if they were killing humans or animals, though. Joshu's gaze fell on the page, only to notice a few small characters after the title on the sharp standard long blades page. It turned out to be a number 2. After a brief moment, Joshu understood. This meant that he had forged 2 long sharp sabers. Actually, after obtaining the secret forging formula, he hadn't only forged 2 sharp standard long sabers, but some of them had been damaged, and the only ones still intact were the 2 remaining with the Huben troop. The Huben troop is a troop of imperial guards, so there are relatively few opportunities to combat. If it's the border army, then it's a war machine. Joshu smacked his lips, appearing to yearn for more. The feeling of his cultivation rapidly rising was just too satisfying. But he still had no way of sending the weapons he forged to the border army, so he could only think about it. As long as I stay in the forging division, sooner or later, the weapons I forge will populate the 3 military forces of Great Xia. At that time, Joshu couldn't stop himself from snickering. How would it feel to have thousands of people helping me cultivate good, or especially good? Just thinking about it made him feel excited. But Joshu was well aware that accomplishing this was difficult. The 3 military forces of Great Xia were tasked with executing demons, eradicating fiends, and defending the country. The demon-executing army and the fiend-eradicating army dealt with powerful opponents. They were also formidable fighters themselves and wielded ranked weapons. These weapons were provided by the forging masters of the first 36 workshops in the forging division. On the other hand, the country protector army was an ordinary army, and the Huben troop was one of them. A weapon forged by a forging apprentice like Joshu could only be supplied to the country protector army. If he wanted the weapons he forged to be used by all 3 military forces of Great Xia, he had to at least become a forging master. This wasn't urgent, though. Just the country protector army was enough to keep him busy for many years. Xiao Zongshui promised General Chang that he would provide 3,000 Huben sabers in 3 months. 3,000. It's certainly impossible to rely on just one person. He'll probably pick a bunch of people to participate in the forging. Joshu didn't care what Xiao Zongshui would do. It wasn't like Xiao Zongshui would give him any money. What Joshu was concerned about was how many Huben sabers he could weave in with this opportunity. If he went all out now, he could easily forge 5 Huben sabers a day. This way, he could make 150 Huben sabers a month, and he could forge 500 Huben sabers in 3 months. But handing in so many Huben sabers would expose his strength. At that time, it would be troublesome if he attracted the attention of someone with an ulterior motive. Usually, forging 2 Huben sabers every day isn't an issue for a forging apprentice who works hard. As the creator of the Huben saber, my forging skills are undoubtedly better. It shouldn't be strange if I work overtime and manage to forge 3 Huben sabers every day, right? 3 a day, 90 in a month, and 270 in 3 months. I'll be able to gain 500 years of cultivation at once if more than 200 sabers kill enemies at the same time. Joshu was so giddy with joy that he wanted to sing. How many levels of the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique could he master if he gained 500 years of cultivation? The first level required 2 years of cultivation, the second level 4 years, the third level 8 years, the fourth level 16 years, the fifth level 32 years. For a brief while, he couldn't figure out how many levels of the Dragon Elephant Prajna technique he could master with 500 years of cultivation due to his poor calculation skills. It doesn't matter. In any case, 500 years of cultivation will undoubtedly make me stronger. Joshu didn't even try to do the math. At that point, putting everything else aside, beating Xiao Zongshui shouldn't be an issue, right? This is the correct usage of the legendary Armament Canon. How great can a forger become by relying on a secret forging formula? It's only satisfying when it's used to increase your cultivation level. Joshu rolled up his sleeves and raised his hammer with vigor. Sleep? What sleep? Forging brings me joy. I love forging. Joshu felt the hammer in his hand grow considerably lighter as he envisioned how his cultivation would soar in the near future. Ding dang dang dang. The sound of pounding resonated like a passionate song in the small shed. Chapter 9, I'll leave this to you translator, Atlas Studios editor, Atlas Studios still no. Xiao Zongshui's face was so dark that it was about to drip water. Not far away from him, a middle-aged man was kneeling on the ground with a panicked expression. Superintendent, we did everything we could. Xiao Zongshui waved him out. The middle-aged man kowtowed and bolted out in a panic, appearing as if he had just escaped a calamity. Xiao Zongshui didn't care about the middle-aged man's reaction. He frowned and stared at a piece of paper in front of him. Joshu had handed him the formula for the Huben saber on this piece of paper. After obtaining it, Xiao Zongshui didn't disclose the formula in the 97th workshop as Joshu had expected. Instead, he found a group of skilled forging apprentices. 3,000 Huben sabers wasn't a lot of work for a workshop. After all, there were hundreds of forgers in a workshop, and each month, they would forge over 10,000 standard long sabers. Even if the Huben saber was slightly more difficult to forge, Xiao Zongshui believed that if he found around 20 apprentices, he could complete the task in 3 months. In the end, he found many forging apprentices, but none of them managed to succeed in forging a Huben saber. Is there a problem with this secret forging formula? Xiao Zongshui pondered. Does Joshu have the guts? He paced back and forth. After a long time, he put the secret forging formula into his pocket and pushed open the door. Soon after, Xiao Zongshui appeared in front of a luxurious residence and smiled as he stuffed a silver ingot into the gatekeeper's hands. Please notify that Xiao Zongshui, the superintendent of the 97th workshop, wishes to see Grandmaster Zhu. If an apprentice from the 97th workshop saw this scene, he wouldn't believe that the man with a flattering smile was Xiao Zongshui. How could Superintendent Xiao, the supreme leader of the 97th workshop, ask for help so softly? The gatekeeper had his nose in the air and a proud expression on his face. He cast a sidelong glance at Xiao Zongshui before weighing the silver in his sleeve and nodding slightly. Wait. He turned around and strolled through the door. After a quarter of an hour, he returned with his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky at a 45-degree angle. Go in. The Grand Master is waiting for you in the study. Remember, you only have 5 minutes. Thank you. Xiao Zongshui cupped his hands. He walked swiftly toward the study. 5 minutes wasn't much. A moment later, Xiao Zongshui arrived in the study. After following the gatekeeper's directions, a man who appeared to be in his 40s or 50s was flipping through a book in the study. When he heard Xiao Zongshui enter, the man said without even raising his head, Superintendent Xiao, you have graced me with your presence. What can I do for you? I wouldn't dare. Xiao Zongshui's attitude was very low, and he hurriedly said, Grandmaster Zhu, I'm here to bother you because I need you to help me look at a secret forging formula. Grandmaster, please have a look. Is there any problem with this secret forging formula? Grandmaster Zhu raised his head and looked at Xiao Zongshui. His brows furrowed slightly. That's all. Grandmaster, I know that you are very busy, but this is an urgent matter. I'm sorry, but I don't have time to look for a forging master. Xiao Zongshui replied with a bitter smile on his face. Don't worry, Grandmaster. I understand the rules. Xiao Zongshui handed over a large banknote. To engage an expert, one must pay an expert fee. Grandmaster Zhu glanced at the banknote Xiao Zongshui placed on the table. He didn't reach out to take it, but his expression softened a little. Where's the secret formula? Give it to me. Xiao Zongshui quickly took out the secret formula for the Huben saber and handed it over. Grandmaster Zhu took a glance and said unhappily, Superintendent Xiao, despite our friendship, you brought over the forging formula of an unranked weapon. Are you trying to slap this old man's face? Grandmaster, you've misunderstood, Xiao Zongshui hurriedly explained. He was one of great Xiao's few grand craftsmen, and his position was highly regarded. Even formulas for ordinary ranked weapons wouldn't attract Grandmaster Zhu's attention, let alone secret formulas for unranked weapons. Grand craftsmen were probably similar to academicians on Earth. General Cheng Wanli has been ordered to form the Imperial Guards. The designation is Huben, and this is the Huben saber we specially developed for the Huben troops, Xiao Zongshui explained. Grandmaster, you also know that His Majesty is very concerned about General Cheng Wanli forming the Imperial Guards. There can't be any mistakes. Therefore, we would like to ask you to help examine this Huben saber, Grandmaster. After Grandmaster Zhu heard Xiao Zongshui's explanation, his expression softened slightly. He nodded. Even so, this is a formula for a standard weapon. You can just randomly find a forging master to take a look. Despite this, Grandmaster Zhu took up the secret forging formula and examined it closely. This idea is quite interesting. Grandmaster Zhu nodded slightly. It sacrifices a portion of the sturdiness to make the saber's sharpness reach the ceiling of standard weapons. Superintendent Xiao, you have a talented subordinate. Is there no problem with this secret forging formula? Xiao Zongshui asked. It's not a huge problem, Grandmaster Zhu explained. This secret formula can be used to forge incredibly sharp standard long sabers. But, Xiao Zongshui continued asking. But there aren't many apprentices who can forge according to the secret forging formula, right? Grandmaster Zhu hit the nail on the head. The forging techniques used here are easy for forging masters, but they are a little challenging for forging apprentices. The saber is a good one, but mass production is difficult. Grandmaster Zhu, You mean there's no problem with the secret forging formula, just that the forging difficulty is too high? That's one way to look at it. Grandmaster Zhu nodded. If you can invite forging masters to assist you in forging Huben sabers, it won't be difficult. Inviting forging masters? Xiao Zongshui smiled bitterly. Which forging master is bored enough to forge a standard weapon? They could forge any ranked weapon, and it would be worth hundreds of standard weapons. Even if Xiao Zongshui had the prestige, it wasn't worth it. How much was a Huben saber worth? How much money would it cost to hire a forging master? It wasn't worth it at all. But Grandmaster Zhu, I do have an apprentice capable of forging Huben sabers. Xiao Zongshui refused to give up. As I have said, forging this Huben saber is incredibly tough for forging apprentices, but I did not state that it was impossible for them to do so. An apprentice with better skills can forge after 3 to 5 years of training, Grandmaster Zhu added. Alright, if there are no other questions, then let's leave it at that. An old fellow like me has important matters to attend to later. Grandmaster Zhu waved him off. Xiao Zongshui left Grandmaster Zhu's mansion despondently. It wasn't merely to earn the difference that he was so eager to supply weapons to Cheng Wanli. Despite his low official status as a superintendent of a forging division workshop, Xiao Zongshui had a lot of profit. Even people in positions of greater authority might not be as wealthy as him. He had sucked up to Cheng Wanli because he was a popular figure in front of the current emperor. Most importantly, he was in charge of the Huben troops, which were tasked with protecting the emperor. They were going to appear in front of the emperor. If their weapons could enter the emperor's eyes, then the benefits Xiao Zongshui would receive went without saying. But Cheng Wanli would be furious if he couldn't forge 3,000 Huben sabers in 3 months. He would have wasted his efforts if Cheng Wanli switched to another workshop for his weapon supply. It doesn't make any sense, Xiao Zongshui thought. Joshu isn't outstanding in the 97th workshop, so why can't others forge it? There's no problem with the secret forging formula either. Could Joshu have additional skills? Grandmaster Zhu was a grand craftsman. Since he said that there was no problem with the secret forging formula, it had to be the truth. Xiao Zongshui didn't doubt this at all, but he now suspected that Joshu grasped a unique forging technique. Otherwise, how could an ordinary forging apprentice suddenly be able to forge the Huben saber? Even Grandmaster Zhu had said that the Huben saber was difficult to forge for forging apprentices. So what if it's difficult? I, Xiao Zongshui, have solved countless problems in my life. I don't believe I won't be able to handle a mere 3,000 Huben sabers if the secret forging formula isn't a problem. Xiao Zongshui rushed back to the 97th workshop. After returning, he immediately gathered the top-ranked forging apprentices from the 97th workshop. Joshu was also among those gathered. When Joshu arrived at the open area, it was already crowded with around 40 people. These people were in groups and were all whispering to one another. Joshu had no friends in the workshop, so he could only stand in a corner and listen in on everyone's conversations. Xiao Zongshui arrived just as everyone was discussing why the superintendent had gathered everyone. He coughed lightly, and the crowd immediately fell silent. I summoned everyone today because you are the 97th workshop's most skilled forging apprentices. Xiao Zongshui swept his gaze across the crowd. I have a glorious mission for you. This mission is very important to the 97th workshop, so no matter what, we can't make any mistakes. You are all elite forgers under me. I hope that you can complete this mission for me. Of course, I'm not going to make you labor for free. Like a hawk, Xiao Zongshui's eyes swept across the entire scene. I'll put it out here. I'll reward you heavily if you succeed in completing this mission. From now on, regardless of who you are, if you can forge a weapon according to this secret forging formula I have here, I will reward you with 1 tael of silver per weapon. The crowd was in an uproar. 1 tael of silver. Most forging apprentices didn't even receive 1 tael of silver per month. However, there were a few people who lowered their heads and remained silent. They were the people Xiao Zongshui had summoned previously to forge weapons. Thus, they were well aware that earning this money would be difficult. The forging apprentices who had no idea what was going on were ecstatic. They would receive 1 tael of silver for forging a weapon. It was the equivalent of a month's pay. Forging 2 to 3 weapons a day meant. Superintendent, even if we have to risk our lives, we will complete the mission, a forging apprentice shouted. Chapter 10, The problem lies not with the formula but with you. Translator, Atlas Studios editor, Atlas Studios me. Joshu was stunned. He only came to be a bystander. Why was he suddenly dragged into this? Superintendent Xiao, I am too young and inexperienced. I'm afraid I won't be able to bear such a huge responsibility, Joshu said. One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions? Xiao Zongshui had pushed him out of nowhere. Who knew what he was up to? He still said if Joshu couldn't hand over 3,000 Hoben blades in 3 months, then I have better things to do than to take on this task. Joshu was content with his current situation. He would forge 2 Hoben sabers every day and then do whatever he pleased. If he wanted to cultivate, he would cultivate. If he wanted to rest, he would rest. He was simply happy. Superintendent, how can a little brat like Joshu take on such a heavy responsibility? In my opinion, Zhang Yaibei is more suitable to be in charge, an apprentice shouted. Joshu gave him a thumbs up in his heart. What a godly assist. Are you teaching me how to do things? Xiao Zongshui's face sank. He glared at the forging apprentice and said coldly, Zhang Yaibei, do you think so too? Zhang Yaibei was a man in his 30s with a muscular build and tan skin. He had been in the 97th workshop for over 10 years and was one of the most experienced people. In the 97th workshop, his forging skills were the best. Zhang Yaibei lowered his head and said in a muffled voice, No, I'll follow your instructions, Superintendent. You had better. Xiao Zongshui snorted coldly. If I find out that anyone is feigning compliance while acting in opposition and holding up the immense mission, I'll let you know who has the final say in this 97th workshop. Listen carefully. From now on, Joshu's words are my words. If you're dissatisfied, look for me. He tossed his sleeves and turned to leave without giving Joshu a chance to refuse. I want to see 3,000 Hoben sabers in 3 months. Xiao Zongshui's voice came from afar, and the entire scene became silent. When Xiao Zongshui was completely gone, everyone's gaze fell on Joshu. Well, the stares made Joshu's heart feel numb. Uncles and brothers, don't take Superintendent Xiao's words to heart. He scratched his head. Since Superintendent Xiao has given the order, we will, of course, comply, Zhang Yaibei replied in a low voice. Brother Zhou, if you have any orders, just say them. Zhang Yaibei had a lot of prestige among the forging apprentices. Since he said so, several of the angry-looking forging apprentices didn't make things difficult for Joshu. Joshu sighed. He knew that Xiao Zongshui had ill intentions. He was just a young man, and he didn't have any actual power. What right did he have to suppress these wily old foxes? Zhang Yaibei may appear nice, but who knows how he'll react if I actually order him to do something. Brother Zhang, you must be joking. What was done was done. If he couldn't complete the mission, who knew how Xiao Zongshui might torture him? Joshu could only take it one step at a time. My words are far from being instructions. Everyone is here to complete the mission assigned by Superintendent Xiao. Brother Zhang, I don't have much experience. If there's anything, I'll need your guidance. Since he couldn't avoid it, he had to complete Xiao Zongshui's mission as soon as possible. Superintendent Xiao gave us 3 months to forge 3,000 Hoben sabers. We now have around 40 people. A single person needs to forge more than 70 sabers on average. Slightly more than 70 sabers in 3 months shouldn't be too difficult to complete, Joshu added. Zhang Yaibei nodded in agreement. Apart from Joshu, Zhang Yaibei was well acquainted with the rest of the apprentices. Among the forging apprentices, they were all experts. Normally, they would have little trouble forging 4 or 5 standard long sabers. Although Zhang Yaibei had never heard of the Hoben saber, he felt that it was nothing much. If it could be handed to them to forge, it had to be a standard weapon. Forging an average of more than 70 standard weapons in 3 months was less than 1 per day. This task was considerably easier than their usual work. He had no idea why Superintendent Xiao had mobilized so many people. Let's not start assigning quotas just yet. Come have a look at the secret forging formula first. I'll explain if there are any who are illiterate. Forge once as practice later. Following that, we'll assign quotas based on the actual situation, Joshu said. Naturally, no one had any objections. This was a relatively fair method. After all, everyone's abilities were different. It wasn't a good idea to divide the quota equally. Able men were always busy. When it came to working, capable workers received more jobs. Of course, this mission was a little different. They would get 1 tael of silver for each weapon they forged. In this sort of situation, everyone wanted to have a higher quota. Several people in the group shook their heads secretly. These people had no idea what was in store for them. Zhang Yibei was the first to walk to the secret forging formula that Xiao Zongshui had left behind. Zhou didn't compete with him. He had written the secret forging formula, so what was there to snatch? Zhang Yibei was an experienced blacksmith. He quickly finished reading the secret forging formula and frowned. He looked at Zhou and said, "Little brother Zhou, this secret forging formula isn't simple." "I know." Zhou nodded. "You know?" Zhang Yibei asked doubtfully. "I previously forged a Huben saber for Superintendent Xiao." Zhou didn't say that he was the creator of the Huben saber. Xiao Zongshui had ordered the apprentices, who had witnessed him test the saber, to remain silent. Furthermore, because they were not present, Zhou was not worried about exposing himself. "You helped Superintendent Xiao forge a Huben saber?" Zhang Yibei exclaimed in shock. He wondered why Superintendent Xiao hadn't approached him. His forging skills were among the best in the 97th workshop. Meanwhile, Zhou was thinking, Zhang Yibei seems mature and calm, so why is he so easily surprised? "Yes." Zhou nodded. "Based on my experience, forging a Huben saber is more than twice as difficult as forging a standard long saber. It's already quite impressive to be able to forge one in 6 hours. Zhou didn't notice that a few people in the crowd were looking at him in shock. These people had all been summoned by Xiao Zongshui to attempt to forge a Huben saber. They had all failed without exception. How could they not be shocked when they heard that an unknown young man had succeeded in forging? Although they were shocked, they had their own thoughts and didn't stand out to tell Zhang Yibei and the others about their failures. "Brother Zhang, you are a senior. Your forging skills are much better than mine. You should be able to forge faster," Zhou continued. Zhang Yibei's eyes gleamed with a tinge of complacency. He had intended to make things difficult for Zhou, but he decided to let it go because he was so good with words. "Everyone, first study this secret formula. Let me try forging it first." Zhang Yibei spoke as if he was the leader. There were plenty of forging areas in the forging division's workshop. Zhang Yibei didn't return to his work shed. He found a place nearby and began working. Ding ding dang dang. Amid the pounding sounds, the apprentices went up to look at the secret forging formula. But there were few forging apprentices who could read. The majority of them gathered in front of Zhou to hear him explain the secret forging formula. In the distance, where no one could see him, Xiao Zongshui retracted his gaze, feeling somewhat pleased with himself. "You tried to be clever with me. Now, let me see how you're going to preserve your techniques. If you can't complete the mission, I have plenty of ways to torture you." Xiao Zongshui laughed coldly. He no longer looked at Zhou and the others and turned around to enter his room. "Everyone, remember the secret formula. Let's take a look at Brother Zhang's demonstration now." The secret forging formula wasn't long, and because everyone was experienced, they were able to memorize it quickly. Zhou yelled for everyone to gather around where Zhang Yibei was working. When Zhang Yibei saw that everyone was watching, not only did he not feel embarrassed, but he became even more enthusiastic. He swung the hammer faster than before. Zhou's brows furrowed slightly when he saw Zhang Yibei's actions. Zhang Yibei was an experienced forging apprentice, and he was extremely skilled in forging. He was virtually following the Huben saber's secret forging formula to the letter. But in Zhou's eyes, there was a specious feeling. How should he put it? There was form but no soul. Yes, it lacked soul. Zhou's current forging abilities were adequate, but his foundation was lacking. For a moment, he couldn't determine what exactly was wrong with Zhang Yibei's forging. Crack! A light sound broke out just as Zhou was pondering the problem with Zhang Yibei's forging. Everyone's conversation abruptly came to a halt. Zhang Yibei's movement halted in midair as his face was full of astonishment. Failed. Zhang Yibei couldn't believe it. He had spent his entire life forging standard weapons. He could probably forge a standard long saber even with his eyes closed. Although the Huben saber looked a little complicated, its foundation was still that of a standard long saber. Zhang Yibei couldn't believe that he had failed. Halfway through forging, the blade broke. In the crowd, The few people who had had the same experience looked as though their suspicions were confirmed. They had been the same back then, and they couldn't comprehend why things had happened the way they did. Let me try again. Zhang Yibei was quite unrelenting. He threw another piece of iron into the furnace indignantly. Ding dang dang! An hour later, Zhang Yibei looked at another broken blade and started feeling uncomfortable. This time, he had been extra careful. Every step had been taken strictly according to the secret forging formula. But why? Why did it still not work? There's something wrong with this secret forging formula. Zhang Yibei said loudly. It's impossible to forge a Huben saber. Joshu said he helped Superintendent Xiao forge one. Someone in the crowd whispered. Dozens of gazes once again fell on Joshu. Joshu had a thoughtful expression on his face. Under everyone's gaze, he didn't panic. Instead, he said, Brother Zhang, the problem lies not with the formula but with you. There's a problem with me. Zhang Yibei was furious. When I started forging, you were still playing with piss and mud. Forging depends not on time. Joshu shook his head and calmly said, Give me the hammer. I'll demonstrate it once, and then I'll tell you where your problem is.